Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schroeder. Today we have multiple #1 best-selling author of the books Poison Dance, a short story, as well as Midnight Thief, Rosemarked, and the new book, which I got a copy, a hardback version for my son, and we started reading him this book. It's called I Dream of Popo. It's a children's book. We have Livia Blackburne. Livia, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start, Livia, by talking about your background and your journey. You have a PhD. I should have said Dr. Livia Blackburne. You have a PhD in neuroscience from MIT. So we're not talking University of Phoenix or, turned children's author. We're talking a major, one of the top universities in the world. How did you go from most likely writing thesis papers and research papers that most people can't understand to writing fiction and now children's books?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And it's been quite a journey. So, growing up, I was kind of a bookworm. So I was always reading, always writing stories. But kind of being a responsible Asian child, I kind of thought, writing wasn't a good area to go into.
I can relate. I have a degree. One of my degrees is in journalism, and amazing degree, great experience. But being Asian, Indian American, people look at you like, what? Why are you doing that?
Right, exactly. So when are you going to law school? With my parents, kind of encouragement, and I kind of thought the same way. I went into science, so I studied biochemistry at Harvard for 4 years, and then moved on to neuroscience. And so at that point, I had kind of completely put away my writing, and I was far too busy. Didn't even have much time to read at that point. And so what happened was, in my third year of grad school, I was taking a class at Harvard Medical School, and the cold Boston winters there, I was waiting for the bus, and I went into the Harvard bookstore in order to stay warm while the bus came. And there was a display set up there of a popular series back then of a girl and her vampire boyfriend. Might have heard of it. And so I picked it up and started reading, and over the weekend, read the whole series. And, I just remembered that, I used to really love reading and writing. And I think at that point I was looking for some kind of distraction from my thesis work. And I just started writing again. I actually took a part of a novel that I wrote in high school, a horrible, horrible novel, and I took one character from that and gave her her own story. And so I wrote it over the course of a few years. It was kind of my fun thing to run to after I came home from the lab. And, over those years, it was becoming more and more clear that, neuroscience wasn't the right path for me. It wasn't a great fit. And it just turned out that, that novel was far more successful than my doctoral thesis. And so when I graduated, I went to writing and never looked back.
Now, when I was reading your website, you talked about how you had 60, I believe you said, awful pages of your first book, Midnight Thief. So if you read those 60 pages and you thought they were so terrible, what made you think, I can salvage this? I can, make this into a better book. How did you find that part of your writing?
Oh, right. So the 60 awful pages were they were a project I wrote in high school. It was actually I had written it to get out of a camping requirement because we had to either go camping or come up with a separate project. So I was like, oh, well, maybe no, writing a novel is kind of like camping in your head. And for some reason, they let me do it. But yeah, so it was horrible. It was at that point it was called Thieves' Daughter. It was about a girl named Lana who was a thief who discovered she had magical powers and went off to develop those powers. And I was working with an advisor at the time, and he was at that point he gave me a really good piece of advice, which was Lana as a character, she's not really that interesting, and there's not much reason for the reader to care about her. But she has this best friend, Kyra, who is actually quite interesting. And that comment kind of stuck in my head. I didn't have time to do anything about it back then. But when I started writing again, I remembered, hey, Kyra's a pretty cool character. Why don't we give her story? So I actually scrapped the entire, the plot of the last novel. I just kept Kyra and a few other interesting characters and went from there.
Livia, I want to go back to your journey because you said you did graduate with your PhD, and most graduates of MIT with anything, whether it's PhD, any degree, undergrad, they put it to use. They at least go out, work full-time somewhere. Did you spend any time at all working either in research or the private sector or as a professor? Or did you just say, I'm done with neuroscience, I am pursuing this writing fiction full-time?
Yeah, I spent no time whatsoever. And, it kind of makes me sound like a big risk taker or something, but actually, I think it has more, because I'm not a risk taker at all. It has more to do with the fact that I'm just, I was just so done with neuroscience at that point. I had, I saw how, all the brilliant people doing neuroscience at that top level, and I just knew I did not love it enough. I was not good enough at it to compete at that level. So, at that point, I knew I was going to find something else. And the writing was there, and it was something I was passionate about. And I mean, real talk here. One reason I was able to take that leap was also at that point I was married to a spouse with a steady income. So as far as the financial risk of that, I didn't have to face as much of it.
Well, how about your family? Was your family just like, all right, you've got a good husband and do whatever you want? Or were they like, what are you thinking? Like, you're Asian with a PhD. You need to, go do something amazing.
Right. My family, I think they came around over, I spent 8 years getting my PhD. So, they had a lot of time to get used to it. And I think, at first, they didn't really like the idea, but, over time, it became clear it wasn't the right path for me. So, by the time I was defending my dissertation, I think my parents were supportive, and it did help that, I had the husband at that point.
At what point did you accept yourself as a successful writer? Like, what was it along your journey that made you realize, like, oh, okay, I am successful. I can do this. This is my way forward.
That's a great question. Like the first question is, do I feel like I'm a successful writer now? Because the thing about this industry is that the goalposts are always moving. I'm sure you've heard that before. Like first you're like, oh, I need an agent. Oh, I need to get a publisher. Like, oh no, I need to hit the bestseller list. Like, oh no, I need to get a movie deal. So there's always another goalpost to go for. I think the first time it was definitely a really good sign when I got my first agent. And I think, it's when I sold my first book, I was like, okay, I can try to make it in this industry.
Yeah, and I should make one, not clarification, but one addition. I said you were a #1 bestselling author. You're actually a multiple New York Times bestselling author. So you've made it, and that's why you're on this show, because you've sold tons and tons of copies of your various books. So congratulations to you. But I want to talk a little bit about your latest book, I Dream of Popo, and also how it compares to your previous books that were New York Times bestsellers. You went from writing fantasy and fiction novels to I Dream of Popo, which is a children's book. I mentioned that I've just started reading this book to my son, so he's only a year and a half, and the book is really meant for children. How was that transition, writing fantasy and fiction to going into a children's picture book, and why did you do that? Was it challenging?
Okay. First, a quick clarification there. I'm actually I am a multiple published author, but only a one-time New York Times bestseller. So it was my first book that hit the New York Times list. I hope I can
really good.
The podcast. Let's see. So your question was, transitioning from YA to picture book. And I think the biggest motivation for that was I had a daughter, and so once you have kids, you start reading picture books to them. And so I went from not having read a picture book in 20 or so years, 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden I was reading multiple books a week. At that, over the course of 2 years, I was reading hundreds of books, and I just fell in love with that form. You kind of think of them as just things for children, but going back into them, they're really like works of art. The pairing of the text with the pictures, and some the stories and the themes are really wonderful, even for adults. And so I just fell in love with that, and from that, I started thinking maybe I can write this. And I had a friend who wrote picture books, and he kind of showed me the ropes. We wrote a manuscript together that ended up becoming a short story. And from there, I got that idea, and it actually came out pretty easily. The nice thing about writing picture books is that, novels, you write them, you spend, a year or more working on them. But picture books, you write it, and then you kind of hand it over to the illustrator, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting, and you get to kind of watch them turn it into something wonderful. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I find kind of we're out of the pictures book stage in my family, but we recently had to go through a lot of our picture books, and I started thinking, like, now my kids are older, and like we're going through the Harry Potter series a second time we did it with our older kids, and now we're doing it with the twins, and the big kids, they just finished Lord of the Rings. And so, we've done kind of the big book series, but as we were going through the books, I started, flipping through all our picture books and deciding what we're going to keep for posterity, what we're going to give away. And I realized, like, I liked reading Harry Potter and I liked reading Lord of the Rings, but the picture books really, they're books that you could read over and over again, and your kids get routines to them. And
right.
Like there were ways that I read certain books that they thought were funny. There were ways that were, not as funny. There were dances that they did to some of them. So kind of, did you experience any of that? Like when you were writing this, were you writing it and kind of being like, oh, this would be a fun part to do this or do that in, like with your own children?
So this one, I Dream of Popo is a really personal story. It's about a girl who immigrates from Taiwan to San Diego, and about her relationship with her Popo. And Popo means maternal grandmother in Chinese. And so it was heavily based on my own life, and heavily based on the own dreams that I've had about my grandmother. So I think when I was writing it, a lot of it, I was writing it just to get, my own story on paper. And, part of it was also I was thinking about heritage, about family. So I wanted to include that too. So it was kind of a mix of, wanting to tell my story and like wanting to just, pass it on to the next generation.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about one thing that always interests me is how writers write from home? What is your writing process? Do you dedicate a chunk of the day? Do you come and go? And what's your setup?
Right. And the key question here is pre-pandemic or post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, my daughter was going to preschool, so I would drop her off at preschool and actually just stay there. They had a parents' lounge, so I had my laptop and I just drop her off, go straight to the parents' lounge, write for 3 hours and 20-minute sprints. So I do 20 minutes, walk around for 4 minutes, do 20 minutes again. So
So you're like
I was
interval training writing?
yeah, exactly.
What was in this lounge? Was there like food and coffee and desks? It sounds nice for you to just be able to go somewhere for 4 hours and write and take breaks. It sounds like an amazing lounge.
Well, I mean, it was just a conference room basically.
Okay.
No food or anything. Yeah, I brought a thermos of water, and then I brought my meal sometimes, and I heated it up in the teachers' lounge. But yeah, it was
Like a free office space.
yeah, pretty much. There were a whole bunch of like toys if I wanted to play with toy cars or something. Um, but yeah, it was like any quiet space. There was a big table, a chair. That's really all I needed. So that was then. I call that the before times. And then we pulled our daughter out of preschool after the lockdowns, and it's been challenging this year. So nowadays, what I've been doing is I've been getting up in the mornings. Sometimes I get up earlier than my daughter, but usually we get up. Usually she wakes me up. Then her dad will give her breakfast, and do a morning routine, and she'll be watching Chinese cartoons on Netflix for about an hour and a half while I write. I feel slightly better about it since she's learning Chinese. So that's basically my writing time for the day. And in the afternoon, if I have time, then we'll do another hour in which she'll kind of play apps on her iPad, and I will do administrative tasks like marketing, that kind of thing. Because when she's doing apps, she tends to interrupt me more. So I do something that's less brain intensive.
Livia Blackburne, #1 New York Times bestselling author. She has written the books Poison Dance, Thief, Rosemarked, and the new book, I Dream of Popo. All the books are available on Amazon and your local bookstores. The website is Livia, Livia, Blackburne. That's Burne, LiviaBlackburne.com. Livia, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners or anything else you'd like to promote?
So in the fall, I have a young adult novel coming out. It's done with Disney. It's called Feather and Flame, and it's part of a series that reimagines the Disney princesses as queens of their realm. So my book is about Mulan, about her becoming Empress of China and the challenges that she faces there. So I'm looking forward to kind of jumping back into the YA space again.
Livia Blackburne, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. Once again, that's liviablackburne.com. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. You can email us if you have any questions. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Leave us a review on whatever podcasting platform you use. Like us, follow us on all social media. We're everywhere. And until next week, keep on working from home.